What black community? It's a black environment with black women and black children. Oh yeah. Some people they live from day to day. Some people they live from day to day. Some people they live from day to day. Giving love, learning how to give.
Hello, my dears. So, like many people, I have also watched Louis Theroux's Netflix documentary, Inside the Manosphere. And one thing I kept wondering was, do single mothers raise misogynists? The documentary highlighted a theme amongst many of these prominent men within this space. And the theme was that for many of them within their childhood, their father either left for milk and never came back, or he was a very inconsistent figure within their lives. And it's interesting to me because many of these men express very backwards and often sexist views, which is quite an interesting turnout considering the person who was the most prominent in their lives growing up would have been their mothers.
Good morning, everybody. I came across this video. She just dropped it like in the last 24 hours. It's a brand new video. And I came across it this morning and I said, you know what? Let's just get up and jump right in it. Pause. We're just going to go right for the throat. Now, this young lady, she's obviously from across the pond. And I think the Louis Theroux Manosphere documentary is targeted more at the UK London crowd, and so it tracks for her to comment on this and for her to have some affinity for what was presented in the video. But I just think that initially she was onto something in connecting single motherhood to the Manosphere. I just think that her general take on it is a little bit off. Her targeting is just a little bit off center, and so we're going to kind of try to nail it down, because she's kind of coming from the position perhaps that because single mothers are raising all these boys, therefore it would be more likely that the boys would grow up with an affinity for mom, and therefore a healthy respect for women, a love for women even. And I would argue that the existence of the Manosphere is, at least for a good chunk of men, a growing chunk of men even, it's evidence that really what's happening is a rebellion against the very concept of single motherhood in general. Like as a widely accepted culture, I would argue.
These men express very backwards, often very sexist views about women. And I guess it's an interesting paradox to me, because you would expect that a child being raised by a single mother, witnessing her sacrifice for him, provide for him, and do the job of two people, you would think that that would create a level of respect for women, the things that women can do and the things that women often have to do. But apparently, nope, it seems to do the complete opposite. Now, before anyone...
I think she's projecting heavily right now, and I think this is actually what the Manosphere is rebelling against on one level. The notion that pretty much most single moms are competent, striving, morally righteous, blameless even. And what a lot of men are kind of revealing is through either the dealings with their own wives, girlfriends, baby moms and whatnot, or just, from remembering their own lives growing up, watching their own moms date and gallivant and cavort around with this one and that one. The young men are getting a different picture of single moms in action versus the imagery of single motherhood that is widely dispersed on like media, television, movies, you know, songs and whatnot. Dear mama, lady, don't you know we love you, sweet Sadie? You know, we were all heavily conditioned to just assume the best from our moms and explain away the worst, right? It was the left hook, right hook combination. You assume the best and explain away the worst, right? And it's created an overwhelmingly dominating, all-consuming type of culture online and in media, especially, where, again, moms can do no wrong. And the ones who actually do wrong, it's not all her fault. You know, it's somebody else's fault. It was the government. It was the white man. It was your goddamn daddy. It's your daddy's fault that your mama had to get out there and do this and be like that.
I'm done. I'm done with life, and it's all Jermaine's fault. It's always Jermaine's fault.
One gets trigger happy with their keypad. No, I am not saying that the mothers are responsible for the actions of these young men. I am not saying that all of the things that they have done are because of their mothers, because I do believe that once you're an adult, your life is your own responsibility and therefore your own fault. However, are we at least allowed to acknowledge a pattern here? Now, Andrew Tate is probably the most prominent figure within the Manosphere space.
Mum is calling me.
What does she want?
Answer the phone.
Do you want more money, Mum?
And he has openly discussed how he was raised by a single mother in Luton.
But I didn't understand, you know, your history, that you were raised by a single mother. Your father wasn't around.
Yeah.
So you see him once a year?
About that, yeah. When we lived in America up to the age of 11, I saw him more often, once or twice a month maybe, and then...
When did they split?
I was 10.
Based on how he describes his dad, it seems as though his dad only just kind of popped in and out of his life to teach him how to be a man through means that some would describe as abusive. It seems like he would just kind of do this and then disappear again to go and play chess.
Now, again, the automatic assumption here that whatever abuse was happening that made him the way he is, it had to be coming from his dad, who was barely there to begin with, right? It's like he wasn't even there, and when he was there, he was like psychologically beating up on a kid or something. The assumption that the damage is coming from the person who was really hanging around the least, technically, for whatever reason. Let's not even assume that everything happened, that, you know, that the dad is blameless, right? Let's not assume that the dad is blameless here, right? He probably has his own faults, shortcomings, whatever. But the automatic assumption that every bad thing that made a Tate the way he is the dad's fault, when the more likely scenario is that he watched his mom and he saw things that his mom did. He saw behaviors from his own mom that he just, especially as he became a man, and he could see the behaviors of his mom and other women as well. And he starts to realize, well, maybe women just do some of these things sometimes. He starts to form his own kind of worldview about how things work.
Now, it is publicly known that Tate is currently on trial in Romania for many crimes against women. It's quite interesting with Tate because he always complains about the Matrix, yet his biggest snitch is himself.
When I was 24, 25, I sold drugs. Point 7, don't get legal before you get rich. But when I lived in England, I refused to pay tax. It was 40%. So
I refused to pay tax. It was 40%. Now, all of this is just sort of irrelevant here. There's both. But let me jump over to the next.
Quite an interesting one, because he has also spoken about his mother, and his relationship with his mother was quite a chaotic one. He does describe her as being quite abusive and quite a chaotic person in general.
Chaotic again. She uses the word chaotic twice. You know how much darkness a word like chaotic kind of covers up? It's like makeup. You know, hide the blemishes. It's a word like that. She was chaotic. You know? Meanwhile, he's like, Mom, you remember that time you held my head out the car window as you drove down the highway? And she's like, his mom was chaotic. Such a nice word, such a clean word. Women are chaotic.
It was my little sister that I think took the brunt of it. She's 18 months younger than me. And so like she would come to school and she might have like a little speck on her eye or something like that. And they'd be like, hey, what happened? And we're like, yo, you know, we got to go home to this lady, you know. And it was not very male driven. It was mostly, you know, the mother. I'll tell you, I'll never forget the day I knew that she would never touch me again. But I was lifting weights. And, you know, I was 6'2", 6'3" at the time, probably 210 pounds. And I'd said something to her. I was brushing my teeth and she said something crazy to me and I said something back. And she went and she drew her fist up at me and her eyes would always get big. And she was a strong woman. A lot of my genetics came from her. And she read her fist back at me and I looked down at her and I asked her, I said, what the insert 4-letter word are you really going to do? Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget watching her like almost shrivel back. You know what I'm saying? And I knew like, bro, she ain't hitting me no more. But it didn't really cover my siblings, right?
You know, it's so funny. I was watching him tell this story, and I'm not going to tell the story either. But I had a moment like that with my own mom. I remember it was obviously like long time ago. But I remember a moment like that with my mom. She was like, I know you really ain't think you think you're gonna spank me, really? What are you really gonna do? You know, fit your ass down. Get the fuck out of my face. Like sometimes it's like that. And it's this thing where like, I don't know, for a large part of your life, she's like your mom is like physically dominant over you, right? Well, not a large part, but you know, for your childhood, for a good chunk of your childhood, your mom is just physically dominant. She's just bigger than you. And then as a boy, you know, there's a kind of no man's land you cross into as you're developing into a man where you start to become bigger than your mom. Not all guys, but you know, a lot of guys, you start to just become bigger. And then at some point, she's no longer a physical threat to you. And then for a little while after that, it might not even occur to you right away, but for a little while after that, anything that she does to punish you, whether it's physical or otherwise, but especially in the physical realm, anything like that is pure grace on your part. And it's a part of being a man, obviously. So this is something I was thinking about yesterday when we were talking about, you know, morality and strength. You know, morality really can only come from positions of strength because you're not necessarily moral if your morality has never been in a position to be tested. Like if you never had the power to do a thing and then refused to do it because you just decided it was wrong, then, you know, you can't really claim morality. You have to kind of have a position of strength. Mm-hmm. And as a young boy growing up, especially, you know, the single mom home and all that, you come into that physical reality where, you know, I really could beat this person up, but I just won't because she's my mom and we don't do that.
I was the oldest.
He also details how after his mom and dad separated, his mom stopped him from seeing his father as well. Now, Justin is probably best known for his controversial takes on relationships. He doesn't really believe in the traditional monogamy style relationship. He likes to practice what he describes as one-way monogamy, which is exactly what it sounds like. He's allowed to be a whore, but his wife, absolutely not. Justin has expressed on multiple podcasts that he desires to have multiple wives, multiple families, and he also desires to continue to sleep around and slight up even though he is married. Not legally married, but married. This is a complete side note, but
he's in like a spiritual marriage. What is that, like a hippie marriage? Did they exchange like crystals or something? What is that?
Justin Waller is the walking personification of fake deep. This guy tries so hard to say things that sound profound.
People ask me why Miami, and I tell them because if it was 120 years ago, I'd be on a horse on the way to California to dig for gold.
There's a part in the documentary where he gets out of his car and he goes to Louis, before even saying hello, mind you. He goes to Louis, this car isn't success. I don't want you to think that I'm stupid enough to think this car is success. Fuck that car. And it's like, my guy, good morning would have sufficed. Jesus. But anyway, while listening to Justin to explain his childhood and talk about how he grew up, etc., I couldn't help but wonder if perhaps the instability he experienced within his childhood is why he ended up becoming the way he is now.
That is a great question. Now, let's kind of extrapolate that out toward a larger sample size, right? Let's think about the population at large and the kind of explosion of single motherhood. And I'm thinking, because Justin Weller, who knows, I guess he's American, right? Because I'm thinking about, in America, single motherhood seems to be the more dominant, and especially like a promoted, encouraged type of culture in America. And I'm wondering how much of that kind of chaos that he's talking about is a little bit more widespread to varying degrees. Like, not every kid is getting physically abused. Sometimes it's just poverty and neglect, and you're just in the house with your poor, neglected mom, or your poor, neglectful mom, or whatever. But as you get older, maybe you do want to kind of do things differently. You see things, you actually maybe strive for the order that you were denied growing up
within his adult relationships. Because my armchair psychologist opinion is that the chaotic, unstable, or emotionally unpredictable environment probably made him seek complete control within his adult relationships.
One way that I isolated my girl to be only in my frame and not have her friends have influence is I attack her friends' frame. So we get in trouble, she doesn't respect it. Didn't she want to say she wanted to go to Vegas on a girls trip? Yeah. She doesn't respect it. Trash. And I'll just attack every one of her friends because every one of her friends' men, they are an example of what we're teaching not to be. So it's easy to penetrate it. Yeah. And the next thing you know, my girl is coming to me almost as if she thinks I'm going to forget that I told her this, telling me like, I told her that she must not respect me, man. I don't know that. I'm scared.
The homemade.
Now, what he kind of just described is a little bit of a, let's call it wife training, you know? Yeah, you have to kind of mentally build up frameworks for you to both live in. And that's all he just did is sort of describe that process. And obviously this girl takes offense to it because, you know, she's a girl and it's icky to her. At the same time, though, that is the exact type of thing women do to men. It's typically called henpecking, though.
/breadwinner relationship with the woman you refuse to legally marry works for him because it allows him to have that married life structure without any of the legal responsibilities or obligations. But in regards to the one-way monogamy thing, the way he speaks about it in the documentary is incredibly cringe. I have honestly no idea how his woman doesn't get the ick on a regular basis. Because the things that come out of his mouth sometimes, I just don't even know. But anyways, in regards to the one-way monogamy, to many people, that sounds chaotic, which might to some people sound counterproductive for someone who's trying to avoid chaos or instability because that's what they had within their childhood. But although it might sound chaotic to us, to him, I actually don't think it feels chaotic at all. It probably feels a lot more stabilizing and calming, to be honest, than traditional monogamy. And the reason why is because it's essentially strategic risk management.
Strategic risk management. That's an interesting way to put it. And I think about that from like, you have to think about it in terms of like economics, right? Because that's really where these concepts apply the most often usage. And by kind of what I guess women call it decentering, right? But from a male point of view, and this is what they criticize men for, right? The men kind of devalue the position of women in their lives mentally. And I guess the purpose of devaluing the position of a woman in your life is to also now manage the risk that comes from having a woman in your life, right? If you don't give her a prominent position in your life, then her ability to cause damage, trauma, harm, whatever, goes down because, you know, access gives you opportunity.
I mentioned before, his father and mother broke up when he was younger, and his mother stopped him from seeing his father. So with him living his life the way he is, where he wants to have multiple wives, multiple families, etc., then if one of them decided to leave and not allow him to see his kids, he's got other wives and other kids. I do also think as well, understanding Justin Waller's background gives us more context into that Lila Rose back and forth he had on the Whatever podcast.
I might have multiple family.
Oh,
You never know. I might like family more than you. So much I have 5.
Do you think that's a good thing to have multiple families?
I think it's good if there's one dad and there's not a bunch of step parents involved, and the dad can be the hero, and those 5 families live a 10x better life than they would have otherwise. Just what I do.
But you don't think that it will be ultimately an opportunity for jealousy or disharmony amongst
women?
two
Are always
different
going to be
families?
jealous. What's changed
I'm not
about that?
jealous in
Women
my
have been jealous
marriage.
all the way through time. So
I'm not jealous in my marriage.
I don't care about your marriage. I'm talking about mine. What my life is going to be. So I don't answer to you. So that's my answer. I'm going to run my situation exactly how I want to. And generally, when I do that, that's when I have the most happiness, let's say, in my life. So that's all.
And you would want that for your daughters?
Yeah. I live my life unapologetically on my terms. So if my daughters that are overly spoiled and educated in every way and have friends all over the world and world traveled in the best schools in the world, if they have a problem with me at the end of the day, then they can kick rocks too. I'm not going to simp for my daughter.
It's quite funny, really.
Again, it's a rebellion against the world of single motherhood. And I would imagine if you kind of peel back the curtain a little bit and you look at a lot of the big influencers around these manosphere spaces, I'm gonna bet, I would bet 70-30, probably way more than not, a lot of single motherhood raised men, right? A lot of single mother raised men, because this isn't a shade thing, it's just a statistical reality thing, right? And I guess I'm arguing, I am hypothesizing that, especially from a larger cultural standpoint, what's really happening is more of a single motherhood rebellion, a single motherhood rebellion. I know years ago there was a phrase going around the manosphere called like the beta male rebellion or the beta male revolution, something like that, when it basically described the men who weren't being chosen kind of falling out of the dating pool or whatever, sitting out of the dating game or whatever. And I think it's actually a little bit bigger than just the men who aren't being chosen, right? Because what people like, the Tates and the Waller guy and a lot of these sort of, big alpha male type of content creators, I think what they represent is guys who are being chosen in one way or another. Guys who represent, success and being attractive to women and being respected and admired by men or whatever. That kind of archetype of guy is also in rebellion, in opposition to making an attack on the very world, the ideological superstructure of feminism and girl power and girl bosses and single motherhood. Just like in that clip she played earlier with Waller talking about his girlfriend's friends and pointing out the little ways that she's showing how she doesn't respect her man or whatever. What they exist to do in that capacity is to just kind of give a living, breathing example of something else, right? Another way to be. And one, it does kind of attract women on a certain level, because obviously they bring women into their own spaces. And if that energy, if that posture can be replicated, then the other guys who do it will obviously bring women into their spaces. And that seems to be the idea, right? So he's presenting an option in terms of like a male archetype that's actually desirable to men, and also, like, again, a vociferous rejection of the single motherhood matriarchal world order.
because while Justin won't simp for his daughter, he'll definitely simp for Tate.
I don't know if I've said this on the internet yet, but
I didn't want to say it.
I named my daughter Emery.
I think the reason why Justin was so triggered in that
And this is another thing I've noticed about, this modern liberal progressive world. For reasons that I haven't come up with a clean enough concept of it yet, but it seems that any attempts to have male brotherhood, camaraderie, like a uniquely isolated male friend group, they're always being attacked from the outside by like women and the forces of equality and progressivism and whatnot. This is why like the Boy Scouts right now are co-ed. This is why we have like a handful of women. Almost every sports show has chicks involved in it now. You got women in the locker rooms and all of that shit. Remember that whole big deal back in the day where like we have to let women in the golf courses and all that? Like the idea of a men's club itself is kind of thrown away, attacked all the time, right? And so even in that little jab she just took at Tate and Waller, it's like, I think for the purposes of female social and individual dominance, they have to break the bonds between men. And then as a kind of forced and directed retreat, the only avenue of male bonding that is generally accepted and promoted is literally homosexuality, right? Those are the only groups of men, by and large, that left-wing liberal people never criticize the nature of their relationships, right? Because they're already gay, so you can't call it gay anyway. And again, these guys, it's like they serve to represent a different way of being in terms of like the liberal male. There was something I wanted to kind of bring this up, and I really didn't know how to introduce it until just now. But the other day, Jerry O'Connell and Bill Maher did a little sit-down interview on Bill's show, and a couple of the clips went viral because Jerry O'Connell is married to Rebecca Romaine, and I guess they've got like 2 daughters. Might even be twins, I'm not sure, but 2 daughters together and married for a little while now. And they were talking about the Kamala Harris election. And this man revealed a level of pressure that he lives under that I just could not imagine. I'd probably snap. I'd start digging a hole in the backyard. I couldn't live like this.
I'm going to tell you about a bit of, I say this, will I stay married? Blow it over here. My,
sounds like you're going to blow it over here.
The night of the election, this third
Pause,
one.
Bill. That was a crazy sus comment to make, Bill. All right. I know you're all Hollywood and weird, but that was crazy sus, Bill.
I say this, will I stay married? Blow it over here. My,
sounds like you're going to blow it over here.
The night of the election, this third one.
Yeah.
Third election. Everyone knows what I'm talking about here. I was watching late at night the returns, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't think Trump was going to win. I live in California. I didn't think he was going to win. What I was hearing.
I didn't either.
I think he was going to win. No, this is where I live, you know?
Yeah.
I said something along the lines of like, there was no planning. This is what they get. There should have been a primary. I said something along those lines, you know, like I was just spitballing ideas as to, it was a shock, you know. My wife and daughters, without saying anything, became physical with me. They were they were filled with rage.
He got beat up by the women in his life. Jerry O'Connell has reached peak liberal male. And I've been wondering, like, and I've been raising this question for a while now on air, as far as for all the criticisms that liberals and left-wing progressive people have about men and masculinity, what is their model? What's their idea of, you know, peak acceptable liberal man? And I think Jerry O'Connell has reached peak liberal male. A man who is dutiful, devoted, hardworking, successful. You know, he's maintained his physical standard or whatever. He obviously works out and all that. And he's terrified of the women in his life. This is peak liberal male. This is the model, I think. This is the model of a modern liberal gentleman. And then everybody roasted him after this, because obviously no man who looked at this wanted to be this. And this is the problem with the liberal progressive model and their constant nonstop attacks on all things that are men and masculine. You never show a version of masculinity that most men actually want to buy into. This is why, like, years ago, we were joking about the Taliban and this idea of an American Taliban, because honestly, from a just a base male perspective, it's more enjoyable to be a Taliban man than to be a peak progressive liberal male like Jerry over here.
So if I am being careful with you in how I say things, yes, I live in California. I live with not one, not two, but three people who, if I made any kind of joke,
he sounds like a hostage. He sounds like a hostage. He sounds like he got kidnapped and wound up married to the terrorist. This is exactly what they did over there in the Middle East, by the way. They will raid your village, kidnap you, and the next thing you know, you're married to a bearded terrorist, right? That's exactly what happened to Jerry, but with titties, though. Instead of a beard, he got held hostage by titties and blonde hair. And now he's like, honestly, like, I would say blink if you need help, but I know the nigga probably can't even blink. He just got Botox this morning. The nigga can't even blink. He is really a hostage. The nigga's a victim. The nigga Jerry is a victim. And all this time, we never knew. Because that is the thing, right? You're supposed to carry it well. As a peak liberal male, you're supposed to take your pegging with a straight face and a smile. And only now in this moment, maybe it's the weed smoke in the air. Maybe he's kind of hanging out with Bill Maher, and Bill's like his version of a cool guy, and he's like letting his guard down next to the cool guy or whatever. And so now he's talking, and he's kind of like revealing the truth of it all right now, you know?
Anything became physical with me. They were filled with rage. So if I am being careful with you in how I say things, yes, I live in California. I live with not one, not two, but three people who, if I made any kind of joke, they would they'd become very angry with me. You know, I don't want to tell you how to live your life, but I couldn't live that way. I would, whatever household or whatever situation I'm in, I say what I truly think, and if it makes you angry, I'm sorry. We'll have to work that out. Well, it makes.
But I am not going to tuck my tail between my legs and just shut the fuck up. This is what you were dealing with when you were a child. Just sit there and don't say anything.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he was dealing with when he was a child. And I actually watched portions of this interview where Jerry told a story about when he was growing up and he was going to like acting classes and auditions and whatnot. And even before then, when he was a young child, I guess he was kind of one of those kids. His mom tried to put him on Ritalin. Mom tried to put him on some ADHD type of drugs or whatever. And one of the things, the mantra that his mom would tell him is just, why can't you just sit on your hands? You know, instead of blurting out or acting out something crazy, his mom kept drilling that into his head. And he had told his whole story about how he finally got on the, what was that movie I think they did when they were kids? It was Stand By Me. When they and I loved that movie when I was a kid. That was a great like boys' tale type of movie when all those kids walked on this like journey off the railroad tracks. Remember that one scene where they were crossing like a railroad bridge and a train came and it was dangerous. Like, it was a great movie he got casted in. And he was telling how Rob Reiner, who recently died, by the way, that's why they were talking about him. Rob Reiner was the director. And when he got the job working for Rob Reiner, he was trying to like remember what his mom said, keep it together, don't be disruptive, don't be a problem. And he gets on stage and he does his thing, and Rob kind of like got like in his face, and he thought he was like in trouble. He was like, oh my God, my mom told me to just sit on my hands. What did I do? Oh my God, I can't believe I screwed up. And then Rob Reiner looked at him and he was like, that right there, everybody do more of that. And it kind of like unleashed him or whatever as like an actor. And he said, I love that moment. He always thinks about how that moment like set up his whole life. But really what he was talking about was how like his mom kind of caged him in as a young boy, who sounds like she was a single mom herself. And she didn't know what to do with him. She was going to dope him up on drugs or whatever because she couldn't deal with it. And he finally got to a place where he could just be himself a little bit. And it turned into success for him, which is, you know, it's unfortunate because, you know, Hollywood got him and now he's married to his hostage taker. He's married to a terrorist, effectively.
Sit on your hands. Well, what happened to Rob Reiner? More of that, Jerry. More of that.
Yeah.
Where's Rob Reiner's ghost when you need him to be telling you more of that?
Yeah. I'm gonna.
And see, what that kind of little story tells you is that as men, sometimes you do need the pull of an older male figure to kind of give you a North Star to aim for. Because whether they like it or not, whether they understand it or not, it is the nature of woman and man, or woman and mom, rather. It's the nature of woman and the nature of mom to attempt to kind of control and manage the male energy in her life, right? Because it is through control of the male that women can attempt to exert control over the larger world around them. Because women, by and large, don't do the hunting. They don't do the fighting. They don't do the heavy parts of the farming. They don't do the more strenuous physical jobs that, you know, civilization is built upon. But if they can access the mind and body of a man, they can have access to the things that man can do. And so it is in her nature to attempt to kind of control. And through that control, you know, she will almost always smother and stifle the very thing that she's going to need from that man going forward, which is like his dynamic strength, his wisdom, his fearlessness, right? His desire to achieve more than she wants for him. And shout out to the freak with the $2. Appreciate y'all coming out here. We're having like an early morning rant session. Don't mind me as I work my way through some ideas online, but I appreciate y'all coming out to listen. Shout out to my man, the freak with the $2. I do not like bearded breasts. Listen, nobody does. That's why it's unfortunate that Jerry married his terrorist and now he's trapped. I don't think there's any hope for Jerry. I just hope he can do it enough. He just needs to keep making movies and TV shows because he's trapped and he's going to have to pay for that forever now.
Conversation is because Justin clearly does not like feeling controlled at all, especially not by a woman. And I think that's probably because of the relationship he had with his mother. As he said on that Whatever podcast, he's not going to simp for his daughter. So it's quite interesting because for Justin, taking into account how his actions could impact or potentially harm the women in his life is simping. So yes, Justin is going to do whatever Justin wants to do. And no wife, no daughter, and no woman on a podcast is going to tell him otherwise. I think he's very sensitive to a woman pushing back on him, challenging him in any way, because he perceives that as her trying to control or dictate his actions, especially in the case of Lila Rose, because she was challenging his way of life. And he took that as her trying to tell him what he can and can't do, essentially, and trying to assert some kind of control over how he should be viewing relationships or how he should be living his life. What was also interesting about Justin is in another interview I saw he did with Zuby, he was talking about his father. He speaks very fondly of his father, and what he said was quite interesting. He said to Zuby that he feels like his father was a good man, he just lacked the information.
And I think this is another reason why these, quote, manosphere spaces exist. You know, women have been kind of trading notes, I think, strategizing, scheming, coming up with entire plots for world domination, effectively behind the backs of men, you know, their men in particular, the men that they have children and family with. And for a long time, I don't think men have been in the mind of, you know, scheming effectively against that type of thing. And so when I think Justin talks about his dad not having the information or whatever, I think for a long time, for many, many, many generations in this country, there's been a huge, almost propaganda type of effort to cloud men's vision of a woman, of what woman is, from a base conceptual idea. Like what is the female human animal from its core, like at its core level. And this is why traditional notions of like romance have kind of dominated the male mind. I think one of the most kind of revealing red pills that I've adopted along the way is the idea that romance, like the idea of being romantic and all that, you know, the knight goes slays the dragon and rescues the princess type of thing. That stuff has been more, it has affected the male mind far more than it has affected the female mind, right? Which is why a lot of the OG red pill content creators would say that women are almost born red pilled. Men needed to be taught. Men needed to have lesson plans, you know, given to them. Men needed, you know, hands-on testing of the theories, right? But women were almost naturally born red pill because why? It's part of female nature to control and manipulate. You know, the other day I was talking about little girls playing with baby dolls. Like, why don't we see girls playing with dolls anymore? And I was really, you know, it was a whole conversation about women kind of pulling away from motherhood as a concept. And one of the things, though, that is just a functional reality of little girls playing with dolls is it's them psychologically prepping themselves for the world of personal manipulation and interpersonal relationships and whatnot. And I realized that when we talk about these things of like, you know, romance and women being red pilled, because women just, again, by instinctive nature, by instinctual nature, they are more prone to manipulating the men emotionally and psychologically as opposed to otherwise. Only the sort of like alpha types are really adept at manipulating the female mind in any equivalent fashion, but the average man, not so much. The average man is probably a little bit more clueless, a little bit more earnest in their approach to women in this so-called romance. Whereas I think women understand that romance is just a ploy, and it's a ploy that almost entirely benefits her, doesn't quite serve the male who is committing romantic acts to show his long-term potential as a romantic partner. And the reason why you know that is because we have this phenomenon of the bad boy and the 80-20 rule and that whole concept of, you know, alpha fucks and beta bucks and whatnot. Women understand that romance is just another strategy, but it is not necessarily true. And so again, like the idea that men truly understand what's going on with women and female nature, and frankly, how downright predatory elements of female nature truly are in respects to how they look at and relate to men. You know, we talked about women, you know, seeing themselves as prey a lot of the times just because of their own physical reality, but women are human beings, and humans are a predatory species by nature. And, you know, women will exercise that predatory nature against men at times as well. It'll show up in a little bit less directly physically aggressive ways, but, you know, women do have their schemes and their manipulations. And I think concepts like romance and male sacrifice and all that stuff have definitely been overfed to the male mind in such a way that, you know, we now have this kind of duality, these competing modern images of women where on the one hand, she's powerful, she's competent, she's striving, she's successful and all that. But on the other hand, she really wants like a rich, powerful man to come and just take it all away. It's like we've been given these kind of conflicting natures of what the female animal is at a base level, largely from media and movie and whatnot. But my whole point is that I think that, again, to kind of talk about, you know, his father, quote, not having the information, I think what he's really getting at is that as men, as a culture in Western society, we have been heavily gaslit as to what woman actually is.
The way I look at my dad is that he was a really, really good man, but he didn't have information. My dad was, you know, he was doing the best he could with the information that he had. And I think that's probably the most important thing that I could say about my father. He did a lot of things that I wouldn't do. He put up with a lot of things that I would not put up with.
Not entirely sure what he means by that because he doesn't clarify. But if I was to take a guess, you know, if I was to sit in my armchair psychologist chair and analyze this, I think he means he lacked the information that he needed in order to live the life that Justin is living now. Because he witnessed his mother being abusive towards his father and treating him poorly and denying him access to his children, I imagine that what he probably means is, had his father had access to some of the stuff that he preaches within the Manosphere, he could have avoided those kind of situations.
I don't know that women really have a mental framework to really connect themselves to this idea. You know, it's funny. Actually, I happened to catch a piece of a movie yesterday. I was making dinner and I was cooking and cleaning up and stuff, and had a movie playing in the background. It was a 3:10 to Yuma. And I never realized till I put it on. It was Russell Crowe and Christian Bale were kind of like the protagonist, antagonist in the movie. And Christian Bale was like a Civil War veteran. I think he got his foot blown off at some point, and so now they're living out west. He's got a dying ranch trying to make it work, and he's got young boys and a wife and all that. And there was this one point in the movie toward the end where Christian Bale, he makes a comment about his kids having to look at his dad, knowing the truth that his dad was never a real war hero. Like, he didn't get injured in a real battle. Like, they were retreating, and I think it was like a friendly fire thing or whatever, and he lost his foot in a friendly fire incident or something like that. But the point of the story was that for Christian Bale, the whole reason why he was caught in that moment doing whatever they were doing was he couldn't bear the shame and the burden of like his sons watching him, wishing that their father wasn't such a weak man. And I don't know that women can really relate to that feeling of shame and burden and guilt for either side, for the father or the boy. And especially for the boy, you know, where your son got to grow up like, this is my dad. You know, watching your father be weak, I think it does something to you. And I'm so thankful for the father that I had, because as I say this right now, I really cannot relate to watching my father be weak. Like as as a man, I don't recall many moments, and I'm sure he's had moments in his life where, you know, shit just went bad for him. He had to take a knee and get it back together or whatever, because, you know, life happens to you. But as a boy, I do not recall like really stark, painful moments in life of watching my father be weak. And I don't know that women can truly understand how heavy that is for a boy. And perhaps what that does to the man who grows up watching his father be weak, where weakness itself becomes a specter in your life. Weakness itself becomes an enemy that you're constantly running from, that you're constantly motivated by. And so when we talk about like this manosphere thing, you know, this hyper masculinity that they accuse the manosphere of, you have to understand that for boys growing up in the single motherhood environment, and the kinds of men that are in and out of the lives of these women, and the kinds of men who actually stick around often in the lives of these women, I think for a lot of boys, they grew up watching men be weak. And so what we've now grown up with, well, what we've now created rather, is after, you know, successive generations of more and more men, more and more boys watching more and more men be weak, we're now hitting the period of backlash where weakness itself is the enemy. And it's strength at all costs. It's strength regardless of the look, right? I would rather be strong than look nice. And this is what, you know, to bring it back to Jerry O'Connell and his whole interview with Bill Maher, he seems like, you know, the very picture of peak Hollywood liberal male. You look nice, but you're weak. And so now you have these two stark examples. Would you rather look nice but be weak, or be strong and I don't give a damn what that looks like? And this is how you get a manosphere.
I wonder if perhaps Justin believes that the key to avoiding having the same outcomes as his father is to live his life in the way that he's living it now. This exaggerated form of masculinity, this desire to be able to be in control of everything, this desire to not allow his wife or any of his female partners to dictate what he can and can't do, and to all.
Well, again, when you've grown up where at every turn in your life, there's almost always a woman who is the authority figure in your life. It's your mom, then she drops you off to school. And school is just a giant concrete box filled with angry women who don't like you for being a boy. It's a giant concrete box full of women who've been trained in their own other giant concrete box to not like what you are as a boy. And so now your mom drops you off into this big giant concrete box full of women who've been trained to look at you funny. And you do that for 18 years. You go get a job. You apply to work at some other giant concrete box. And who you have to talk to? Another woman who's just like all the other women who've been trained to not like you. I'm just saying. And I'm not going after your girl Patience. I'm not talking bad about this girl. I don't think there's anything wrong with the girl. And she looked young. What is she, like 21? I am not here to beat up on the children, goddammit. We're just talking about ideas and things.
Always have the ability to have one foot out the door by not legally tying yourself to anyone. I do wonder if that is what he means when he says he doesn't think his father had access to the right information, because I think that he thinks that if he lives his life this way, he can avoid the outcomes that his father had. So it kind of essentially becomes an overcorrection, performing this over-exaggerated hyper-masculinity, because he might think that in order to be respected and in order to receive kindness, that is what you have to project. Because the opposite of that for him is probably weakness, and he perhaps believes that weakness is what leads to situations like what he witnessed within his own household. So,
and again, this single motherhood thing, this rebellion against the single mom, I think it needs to be studied more from a cultural perspective, because I think that's and a grand kind of symbolic theme. This is really what's happening here. It's like a giant struggle for control of the male identity, individually and collectively, even, because within the confines of just like the single mother child mom relationship, right, there is men and manhood as the mom sees it. That's why they have this kind of trope of, and especially we see this a lot. We talk about this a lot, like in the ghetto with Black women and Keisha and whatnot. You dress your son like the man you want to have sex with, that whole phenomenon. So there's this trope of, well, really, there's this like tug of war really between how the mom sees men, how the mom relates to the men in her world, and then how the mom sees her son and the man she wants him to be, versus how he sees men as a boy, how he wants to be as a boy, what he thinks are the desirable qualities of manhood he wants to copy after. And naturally, there's going to be friction there. Because, and this is, again, part of the biological reality of being woman. The things that frighten women about men are also the things that draw men, that draw women to men. That strength, that dynamism, that the fact that he's a little bit crazy. I don't know what he might do next, but I know he's going to do it. These things are attractive and repulsive on different terms, but again, these are the things that repel and draw women toward men. Yet, from the female perspective, the only way to really manage that is to control it, and her attempts to control it kind of retard the masculine development, because in her mind, all the things that she hates but she's still drawn to, she'll just label them as toxic and never have to work out the mental contradiction. She'll never have to live with her own hypocritical nature. She could just totally block that out mentally and go forward in happiness.
I guess what we're learning here is that the key is balance. Definitely don't abuse your son, okay? But also don't dote on them either, because let's be honest, there are two sides of this extreme. Being a chaotic and abusive mother is gonna harm your child, but also being overly doting is also going to harm your son. Because I do personally think that doting mothers absolutely create man children, men who never manage to actually grow up because their mothers have always basically treated them like children. I'm sorry if that offends anyone, but it's true. There's a reason why the boy mom stereotype exists. A woman who
I wonder how true that really is, though. Are boys really more spoiled than the girls at this point? Because I don't know that we're looking at a generation of boys who are the products of being, overly mothered. I would argue, and again, in keeping with the theme of the discussion right now, if the Manosphere is a rebellion against single motherhood, people don't rebel against good leadership. People don't rebel against effective, competent leadership, right? People typically rebel against not just abusive, incompetent structures, but overly like comically abusive, comically incompetent. Like, you kind of have to hit, this is why we make jokes about like communist countries, because things get so ridiculously bad that you can't even imagine. Like, no one could imagine millions of people starving, right? And this is, the conditions it would take for people to like rebel. And I guess what I'm arguing is that for a lot of men growing up, the reason why we have a quote manosphere is because the conditions of their childhood in their home with their, you know, blameless angelic mothers, the conditions were not that great. Psychologically, materially, emotionally, the conditions were not that great. And so now you have a nation of men and boys who are effectively in rebellion because it's not as good as the brochure told us it would be. It's just not hitting the way you told us it would hit. And so now we have, you know, this online culture. You know, what's wrong with the boys? Why are the boys being all misogyny? What do we do about Gen Z? All this new all this new worry about what's going on with the boys. I think it just stems from that basic simple truth is that we've created conditioning. We've created a set of conditions that, you know, from the male perspective, more and more boys are just, you know, either opting out of whatever the societal norms are, or they're rebelling. Rebellion is a better decision than cooperation. Rebellion is a better decision than submission. Rebellion is a better decision than, you know, keeping the charade up. And so I think that's what's kind of been going on. Am I going to do a video on Dolores Huerta and daughters trying to erase Cesar Chavez's legacy? Dolores straight succubus. Nah, I don't know enough about what's going on over there. I wasn't really going to touch that one. That's a little bit out of my realm. I do think it's interesting how they're doing the believe all women against Cesar Chavez. And isn't that same woman, doesn't she have like a couple of his kids? Like that's a sticky Mexican situation. I have no idea how to sort that one out. So I wasn't even going to touch that. I was just going to watch that one play out. I do think it's crazy how how the liberals just, you know, they can't help but to sacrifice one of their guys. They, no matter what happens, they will sacrifice one of their guys, which is another thing, you know, tying it back to the Jerry O'Connell thing. I think the liberal male knows almost like from, you know, again, a feeling of prey, right? A feeling of constantly being in danger. I think the liberal male understands that he is always put up for sacrifice. Like you are always in danger. Your position is never secure. Shout out to Rational Baz with the $5. He says, we're having all the discussions that should have been had at home and in what a real school should be. Yeah, I think that's actually what's going on here. Again, you know, we're holding church in the wild. Church has been kind of subverted and taken over by the evil forces of matriarchy and global homo and whatnot. And so dudes are having church in the wild. You can't go to regular church. You know, Zog got regular church. Regular church is Zog occupied. So you have to go have church in the wild. And that's what's been really going on. It's like, it's kind of like in one of those movies where, you know, the rebellion takes off into the woods and forms into little isolated splinter cells and all that. We communicate by ham radio and a bunch of secret codes and whatnot. That's really what's happening here. There's a kind of a rebellion against just the natural order of the system at large. Because the system isn't working for the men. And so why continue to play along? But shout out to Rational B with the foul ball. Appreciate y'all coming out. I'm going to hang out for a few more minutes before we get up out of here, man.
Good women are dead. Evil bitches, rise up!
I need that money.
But I've been kind of thinking this out, and we're still talking about Jerry O'Connell and this idea of peak liberal male. And then with Chuck Norris dying recently too, I think it's even more pertinent to think about this. Rest in peace to Chuck Norris. Because one of my favorite things on the internet is Chuck Norris jokes. And I don't know if you guys noticed this, but it was a couple of years ago when I realized like Chuck Norris jokes on the internet have like its own. They've taken on their own life. Like there's a whole culture revolving around Chuck Norris jokes.
Don't look now. Chuck Norris is right behind you. I heard superheroes read Chuck Norris comics. I heard at night the boogeyman checks into the bed for Chuck. I heard Chuck Norris's reflection won't even look him in the eye. I heard when cops need cops, they call Chuck Norris. I heard when Chuck gets in the water, sharks get out of the ocean. I heard when Chuck Norris is hiking, grizzlies look out for him. I heard Chuck Norris rides the motor without the cycle. I heard Chuck Norris wears a hat to protect the sun. I heard medicine takes Chuck Norris to feel better.
Medicine takes Chuck Norris to feel better. And out of all the 80s action heroes, really late 70s, early 80s action heroes, Chuck Norris kind of ushered in a new genre of like martial arts, the white man martial art action hero. Before there was Jean-Claude, there was Chuck. Before there was a Schwarzenegger, there was Chuck. Before there was a Stallone, there was Chuck, and for his day, Chuck Norris, and not only that, Chuck Norris was an actual fighter. He wasn't a martial artist, right? He wasn't painting pictures on a canvas. He was beating the shit out of guys in bare knuckle fights and crowds full of people. Chuck Norris was really the guy. He was him. He was the original him. And again, he was like Hollywood's representation of peak American alpha male. And Hollywood had done a great job up until recently. Honestly, Hollywood had done a great job of giving an image of like peak masculine, a man's man type of character that other men wanted to model after and be like. And I think that's what the Chuck Norris jokes kind of represent, is how well loved he has become in that regard. Walker, Texas Ranger. And the fact that these jokes all give him like a godlike energy is just a testament to how much he kind of fit that archetype of like peak man. Then after Walker, Texas Ranger, he kept all the old people in shape selling Bowflex machines. Which one of y'all grandmother, grandfather, or uncle got a Bowflex machine in the garage? Chuck Norris did that, right? And the reason why I'm kind of even going off on this little rant in closing is because with the passing of Chuck Norris, and then, you realize like Schwarzenegger's old, Stallone's old, Dolph Lundgren's old, everybody's old. What's the model going forward for like the new peak alpha male? Because you realize Hollywood is all like liberal and progressive now. So, a few years ago, they wanted to make James Bond a black woman. Matter of fact, in the very last James Bond movie where they made James Bond an absentee father, they made James Bond an absentee dad. That was so crazy. Look, even James Bond had to deal with a single mom who, it was a complicated thing. I'm not going to ruin the movie totally, but like the last James Bond movie, they gave him a kid, and then they tried to low-key replace him with a black woman. Like they just did my man dirty, and he died at the end. They did my man dirty. But like, I'm looking at like, and then I love Daniel Craig as James Bond, but even as James Bond kind of concluded his whole storyline, it was like 5 movies or whatever, you can tell they're really coming after that image. And especially because he's, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy. They're really coming after that image of like peak Western alpha male. And right now, for better or worse, and definitely a lot of worse happening. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I have zero criticism for men or the manosphere, but like what the manosphere is attempting to do is to at least keep alive that spirit of the Western American man. You know, I beat people up and girls love me. I kill the bad guy. I save the little kids. I get money. That whole image of the American man, you know, peak alpha male. Hollywood is going out of its way to kind of destroy it and subvert it on every level. You know, it's in movies, it's in TV, you know, even in comic books, you know, in the actual canon DC world, Superman has a son called, was it John or something like that? And they made Superman's son gay. I remember years ago in X-Men, they had the character Iceman, Bobby Drake, I think. They made Bobby gay. And it's like they take all these characters and they intentionally subvert them. And then they leave you with nothing left. And the only thing left for as much as they criticize and hate what's happening, the only place left is the manosphere, apparently. But yeah, I guess we're pretty much to the end of my rant on that one.
Get what they coming to church doing? Being gay!
But I appreciate you guys coming out. Hit that like button. Damn, Wolverine's son too? Damn, I didn't even know. Dakin? Not, oh man, I didn't even know. Not Wolverine. They got Wolverine. Bruh, I didn't even know. Didn't even know, man. But yeah, shout out to Patience Zena. Appreciate the video. Gave me something to talk about in the morning. So, you know, there's that.
Get back in the kitchen.
But thanks for watching. Appreciate you guys coming out. Like, share, and subscribe. I had some content that I said I was going to get to a little bit later. We're going to do some more. We're going to do some more streaming a little bit later on, but I'm going to go eat breakfast or lunch or whatever time it is, whatever meal I'm scheduled for right now.
These blacks.
Aspiring to be patriarchs like what white men have, that isn't freedom. That isn't going to help anybody. It's certainly not going to help black people.
It's done. It's done. It's done. It's done. It's done. It's done.